Hey, so weird thing today. I have two scripts that didn't really make it into full videos on their own, and because I needed to get something out and my depression is killing me, I decided to package them together into a double feature. Thanks for understanding. Oh, what's that? You didn't understand? Oh, well, then I hope... I've spoken at length about villain redemptions and how terrible they are, and I'm not necessarily about to do it again, though we are talking about something tangentially related to it. You see, there's this vicious cycle that fandom discourse goes into every time they woobify a villain and beg for a redemption, only to get one that's terrible and then lament that we can never seem to capture the magic that was Zuko's redemption arc in The Last Airbender. How come this villain redemption worked where so many others have failed? Well, I think it's time we talked about that in a very frank manner. The reason Zuko's story works is because he's not a villain and his story isn't about redemption. Alright, so that's all for today. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Remember to drink water, get vaccinated, and get a good night's sleep. Alright, fine, I guess I'll elaborate. The problem with trying to compare every villain redemption to Zuko's story is that even comparing them at all is fallacious. Zuko is barely an antagonist for most of Avatar's lifespan, only for the first season, and even then he's a minor antagonist compared to General Zhao. His concerns and goals are small, especially when contrasted to his motivation. Zuko is a victim of narcissistic abuse, his father withholds love and affection that should be given to him freely, and Ozai pits his siblings against one another to compete for his love. Very early in the series, we learn that Zuko's quest to find the Avatar and restore his honor is a false one. Zuko's crime was looking out for the safety and well-being of Fire Nation soldiers and then being expected to duel his father in response to his supposed insolence. And his father permanently mutilated him for it. The first thing we learn about Zuko is that he needs to restore his honor, and then 2 episodes later we learn that's a complete and total lie. I'm fond of saying that victims of abuse do not need to change, and this is partially because stories about abuse victims are very frequently devolved into either victim blaming or shaming a victim for being angry. The victim either turns into a villain or is browbeaten into learning to forgive entirely for the sake of the abuser's comfort. But the truth is that a victim of abuse did not do anything to deserve this treatment, and being angry at your abuser and wanting justice is not actually a wrong. It's not something that needs to be atoned for or even discouraged. Victims of abuse do not need to change. Ever. Zuko's entire character arc is about him trying to be the kind of person his father wants him to be, so his father will love him. From the very start, Zuko was a good person trying to be a bad person because he believed it would make the abuse stop. And when it didn't, because it couldn't, because nothing could, he learned that he was not the problem. He was not the one who did something wrong. Ozai was. Ozai abused his children and was going to kill his own son. There is nothing Zuko could have done to warrant that because he is a fucking child.
How can you possibly justify a duel with a child?
It was to teach you respect.
It was cruel, and it was wrong.
But it's because of that he's even susceptible to this gaslighting in the first place, because absolutely nobody wants to just accept that their parent doesn't love them. I had to accept that when I was a kid, and I can speak from personal experience that it is completely and utterly devastating. It destroys your self-worth completely, and so children are inclined to believe that if they appease their abuser, then good things will happen. But just like any superstition, it is something that people only believe because accepting the reality that bad things just happen without rhyme or reason or justice is frightening. All children want their parents to love them, and all children deserve to be loved by their parents. Zuko isn't wrong for wanting his father to love him, and he has to accept that he just never will. You're watching an entire story where you see this child be gaslit by his own father and have to undo that gaslighting mostly on his own. What makes Zuko's story so fucking good is because it's one of the few stories that gets everything about abuse right, especially the part where your abuser deserves no sympathy from you. His story is about recovery, not redemption. Zuko might have to make amends to the people he's wronged on his path to recovery, but that doesn't equate to redemption. If anything, it only highlights further just how wrong-headed it is to try and make the round peg fit the square hole. It is extremely reductive to call Zuko's story a villain redemption, but people do it anyway because a lot of people cannot think outside of very simplistic concepts. The part that trips people up is that I can think of several villains that do resemble Zuko in terms of their story, but the reality is that if you can sincerely think of a villain that resembles Zuko in some way, that's generally a red flag that someone fucked up. Victims of abuse are fodder for all sorts of stories. They're pretty much baby's first emotional depth, but more often than not, abuse victims are often written by people who understand nothing of the subject they're covering. It's probably one of the most commonly mishandled subjects in the world because people will exploit it for cheap shock value and drama and not pay it the respect that it deserves. Abuse survivors are not time bombs waiting to go off. They just require a bare minimum amount of empathy. But more often than not, it's common to see abuse victims shamed for not immediately getting over their abuse, both in terms of storytelling and in real life. We've seen it countless times from from abusive men bitching about Me Too, conservatives crying about cancel culture and so on, but abusive people hate being held accountable for their own actions. And this narrative is all about casting doubt on abuse survivors, to act as if basic empathy is conditional for them, to act as if there is a divide between a hypothetical good victim who forgives their abusers and a bad victim who is punitive. Always take note that the victims who are villainized are always the ones who try to inconvenience their abusers. It's always on the victim to let it go, and not on the abuser to just not torture people. These sort of stories where victims are cast as being the ones with something to learn are wrong-headed, full stop. Bismuth should not have been told not to seek justice on her oppressors. Valen should not have been doomed to die without the player even being given the option to extend the same hand Arkan was given. Sylvanas should not have been given a villain story in the first place, and retroactively had things that weren't actually her fault made into her fault. These things simply should not have fucking happened. They shouldn't have been written the way they were, and the people who wrote them that way are fucking assholes. And of course, the counterpoint to this is what happened to Azula, who arguably went through an equal but different variety of abuse from Ozai, even to the point of her mother calling her a monster, and she's characterized as cold, heartless, and irredeemably evil.
My own mother thought I was a monster. She was right, of course, but it still hurt.
So what's the core theme here? In case it wasn't clear from the way Legend of Korra tortured Korra constantly for drama, the creators are misogynists. Same with Sylvanas and Valen. It's just misogyny. Zuko was not a villain. He was an abuse victim being given the justice, closure, and chance to recover that he deserved. And if you see a villain that reminds you of Zuko, then they should not have been a villain in the first place. This is why we will never have a villain redemption like Zuko, because to even get to the point where a villain can even resemble him, the writer has to already fuck up 6 ways from Sunday. And if you're that fucking stupid, you're never pulling out of that nosedive. It's actually quite rare for abuse victims to turn around and become abusers themselves. And no, being snippy with people is not becoming an abuser, no matter what hypersensitive men like to believe. I was trimming Michaela's old videos for their re-release to the channel when something struck me. And once I gave the children back their frisbee and learned a harsh lesson about working in the park, I started thinking about the reception toward Amity in the Owl House. Because while her character is fine, I mean, it's perfectly fine, it's not great, it's not terrible, it's just fine. It was both disappointing and yet completely expected the way people latched right onto Amity the moment she debuted in favor of every other character in the main and supporting cast. I've talked about Amity in the past, expressing disappointment with the fact that for such a creative show, Owl House has so far stuck to a very rigid trope when it comes to this particular character. While Amity has improved as a character, that improvement is seen alongside the growth and development of every other character in the show, and as a result she remains the least interesting character in the Owl House. That's not inherently a negative, it's just someone has to be last. And of course she is, because she belongs to a character trope that never creates characters who are interesting or compelling on their own. The school bully is as small-time an antagonist as you can get, and rarely can they drive a plot on their own. Even Heathers, which is this trope taken to its logical extreme, needed not only 3 of them, but also spent more of its time with the self-entitled white boy turned school shooter. Their entire character is either to be shown up by the underdog main character, or simmer the fuck down. A lot of people compare Amity to Catra or Zuko, but in truth neither of those comparisons fit, because they're all vastly different character archetypes. Catra isn't a low-stakes antagonist, she directly pursues the main character as more akin to a jilted ex. She's Axel from the second Kingdom Hearts game, aggressively chasing after a former friend and hastily having a sympathetic backstory shoved onto them when the audience got thirsty and demanded a redemption. These type of characters only survive because a lot of people liked them, and oftentimes they need new storylines to be written for them so they aren't as much of an absolute turd. Zuko, as we established earlier, isn't even a villain for the most part. He has more in common with Riku and Finn than he does anybody else. Amity isn't enough of an abusive creep to be Catra, and her character arc isn't as explored enough to be Zuko. She's Diana, but gay. People get upset when you suggest that Amity's crush on Luz is the only thing she has going for her, but the sad reality is that Amity's crush on Luz is the only thing she has going for her. Most of her story is copy-pasted from other alpha bitch being humbled stories over the years. Just to stay on Diana for a minute, Diana was a foil to Akko in the first half of Little Witch Do the Macarena before supplanting the other characters in the second half, and the problem with that was that Diana was so generic and so dull, and the only thing she had going for her was pressures of an aristocratic family as a motivation. Now, just being a boring character is hardly a sin, but what made it worse was that she sidelined 2 far more interesting characters for the sake of a story that was itself extremely fucking terrible. It's like if a Kingdom Hearts game decided to junk Riku and Kairi in a bin and focus more on Roxas and Naminé. I mean, Xion is right there. And one of the reasons this frustrated me so much was that I seemed to be alone in thinking this. I made the horrible mistake of Googling what other people thought of the show when I was covering it, and evidently Diana was one of the most popular characters in the show for seemingly no reason. And her and Akko formed the single most popular ship. I mean, what? Putting aside the fact that they had no interactions that were shipbaity in the slightest, there was an entire episode about Susie having an intense, deep subconscious girl crush on Akko, and it was adorable. Am I crazy? Like, am I legit crazy here? Because it feels like I'm crazy. And I get that feeling with Amity even more, because despite the way I phrased it, at least Susie was popular enough to find some people pushing back against that perception. I don't find any of that in the Owl House. For all her development, Amity has never really evolved beyond angst and being really insecure, and also overbearing parents. And it all fits that mold so well that the end result is just another one. And this is one of those videos where I can't do anything but throw up my hands and say, I don't get it. I really don't get it. People were shipping Lumity before Amity even had become a friend when Willow was right there, and I don't get it. Like, I understand the core idea behind Catradora, people fetishize abuse. I understand the core idea behind Raylo, people were racist as fuck. I don't need to rack my brain to figure out how people got worms in their head there. With Amity, I don't get what made so many people shove all the other characters aside the moment she was introduced. I wish I had a conclusion for you here, but I just don't fucking get it.